What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Multifamily Wealth Podcast. Another in-studio episode here with a longtime colleague of mine, friend of mine. We've done a few episodes, I think. We've done two. Mr. Ryan Corcoran, who is buying multifamily properties and flipping homes really all throughout New England, I think at this point would be fair to say. We met through, doing deals up in New Hampshire and kind of playing in the same arena up there. But you've got experience doing deals in Mass, in Rhode Island, and I think what I really love about your business is the focus on direct to seller, which is obviously what we do in our business and what I'm sure we're going to talk about here today. But quick refresh for everybody. Give everybody your story. How'd you find real estate? What were you doing before that? And what are you up to today?
Yeah, so started off, I went to PA school. I thought I was going to go to medical school. I ended up doing a shorter route, so PA school. I graduated and I had bought a duplex. I thought I was going to live in it. Ended up renting both out, and then I sold it, and I walked away with a check the size of my PA salary that first year, and I'm like, all right, hold on, something is going on here. I got to explore this more. So 2 turned into a 3, turned into a 6, and then I started just buying, larger and larger properties, bringing in some equity partners, doing the BRRRR strategy, that everybody talks about. That was back in 2018, 2019, 2020. Yeah, stepped away from medicine in 2021, I believe. So it's been about 5 years or so. So I've been running SPG for the last 5 or 6 years. So it's going great. Yeah,
no, I love it. And let's talk about how it's evolved, because I know you as you mentioned, right, you snowballed with the multifamilies early. You started to, built a portfolio that was probably throwing off cash flow. You probably pulled money out of, and, you kind of had a nice stable foundation there, call it 4 or 5 years ago, 21, 22. I've noticed that over the years, just from knowing each other and following what you guys are doing on Instagram and all that stuff, expanded, and it seems like you've expanded geographically over the last few years and expanded into, doing more flips and stuff like that. Is that a fair assessment? How has the business evolved, call it, over the last few years?
Yeah, 100%, man. So, when rates were 2.5%, 3%, even 4%, that's when we really went hard on the multifamily, right? Acquiring, a 66 unit portfolio, another 60 unit portfolio, an 80 unit portfolio, 6s, a 24 unit, a bunch of these apartments. And we could go in, stabilize them, pull out our cash, keep the cash flowing asset, get the investor back out of the deal, and then just keep recycling it. But then, 22 came around roughly, and interest rates started to spike a little bit. Mm-hmm. I remember I had one deal. I used hard money to buy it, so I had a 10% interest only payment, and my plan was to refi at 3.5%, 4%, just like every other deal. And we get to the table pretty much, and the bank said no, and they bumped the rate up 3 points because it had spiked, so it was almost 6%, and the deal just didn't make sense anymore. And I'm like, oh my god! So I had to dump that.
You just sold it. You just sold it.
Sold it. Made a little bit of money because the buyer needed a 1031. Thank God, otherwise we would have been underwater on that one. But from there, I really pivoted to just being more transactional, just because I saw, not the writing on the wall, but really just, I wasn't confident that I could execute the same business strategy before. So the last, 4 years, it's been a lot of, maybe 60 to 80 deals a year, just buying, flipping, renovating, flipping, wholesaling here and there. We'll keep the really good ones, but if it's not really, really good, I don't even bother holding on to it anymore.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting point. I kind of want to, when you say really good, how do you define that? Is it the deal itself being able to pull out truly 100% of that capital, or is it something intrinsic about the real estate itself?
Yeah, so it used to be strictly multifamily, right? Yeah. So to me, a really good deal now is I really love the location. I would not mind owning this thing for the next forever, right? Foreseeable future. And the price is just so good that I'd be really silly not to take advantage of that. And now because it's mostly direct to seller, or, maybe some pocket listings from agents here and there, I think it's been maybe 2 deals on the MLS in the last 24 months. So the rest is all direct to seller.
Basically none.
Yeah. So we're kind of controlling the deal a little bit more. We have a better, sense of where we actually need to be on it. So, for example, I bought a house up in New Hampshire, and I bought that one in, up north because I was like, what? These never come for sale. I'm never going to lose equity on this thing. And if I have to hold on to this for 30 years, I'm fine. So stuff that's a single family home. Yep. Now we bought 60 units in Pittsfield, New Hampshire, and we're holding on to that one as well. So it really just depends on the deal. I'd love to say that it has to meet a certain cash on cash, or I have to be able to pull out 100% out, but I'm just not operating that way right now. It's more, I really like the asset. I like the location. I believe that it's going to go up in value over time. And as long as I'm not losing, money on it, and I believe in the property.
So cash flows.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, and it's interesting, we've made a similar change in our business where it's like for years there, and it seems like it was a similar approach on your end. It's like, okay, we've got this, good deal, good being defined as we're buying it at some discount and we can go and add some value and pull our money out. But the building is in like, downtown Manchester and Ashworth. We're going to use New Hampshire towns here, and it's like a pretty rough area. And the property management's going to be a pain in the ass, and it does need a lot of construction, so we're taking a little bit more risk there. But it's like, pull the trigger. We've got margin, all that. But now, we were doing the same thing now, where we're just hard passing on a lot of that stuff, more so now. But like the other, kind of intrinsic pieces of it, right? You're talking like good area, want to own it for a long period of time. Like that can be hard to like specifically like quantify in a spreadsheet. It's kind of like a it when you see it type of thing. But like the big things are like a lot of parking, safe neighborhood units that are like laid out well, or if you're not going to be the one to actually go and renovate them and do that. So I think it's just generally speaking that the through line is like, are you ready to own this if rates don't come down and the market doesn't help you and all that stuff?
That's exactly my point, right? So like desirability of the town too, right? So for example, we picked one up in Groton, Massachusetts. Groton is a fantastic town. No matter what happens, Groton is a good town. Versus Laconia, New Hampshire. I bought properties years ago in Laconia.
Shots fired.
It's like they're worth less than I bought them for. You're right. It's like what happened? Well, the rates came down and they got hit hard because it's a tertiary market, way up north versus local to a city that is never going to change, right? So
it is interesting, and I think that's, I'm not defining you as this, but specific to a lot of folks who live out of state as it relates to New Hampshire, is like there's been a lot of people over the last 3, 4, 5 years who live in Mass, or they live in Rhode Island, or they live in Maine, Connecticut, wherever. I mean, there's a lot of like these New England states where, whether it be the pricing doesn't really make sense or the landlord-tenant laws are a little bit more sketchy, a lot of people have been coming up to New Hampshire. And it's like, I think there was a ton of that interest in those real tertiary towns like the Laconias and the Guilfords and the Tiltons and like the Farmington, New Hampshire, where it's like not that much going on in the town. The numbers look great. People are kind of fleeing maybe their hometown or home state rather, as it relates to where they want to invest, and then everything got kind of out of whack. It's like we've seen the same thing up there.
100%. But I'd be lying if I said we didn't make a ton of money buying those, right? At the time, it made sense, right? I mean, we entered one at $4 million and exited at $2 million, and we almost did nothing to the property in the span of 2.5, 3 years. So I mean, I don't want to sit here and say we made bad mistakes. There weren't any mistakes made. The market made sense. 3-4% interest rates. It all added up. Even if the management was more intensive, it still made sense. Now it does not make sense in my opinion with the same model. So
let's talk about like tactically, because you're talking multiple different states. It's a wide spanning enterprise. And then after this, we're going to get into like how you're finding deals, which I think everybody wants to hear. But like, how did you keep the infrastructure together? Like, as you started doing deals in Laconia, New Hampshire, this town in Mass, close to home in Rhode Island when you were there, and it's like, how did you kind of get your arms around the whole thing? Like, just in terms of like some fundamental philosophies or principles you had about, we're going to own in all these different states. How am I going to partner with folks? Am I going to use a management company? Like, how do you think about all that?
So I've never had a in-house property management company. So that's been key number one, because if I were to buy in Rhode Island and then 2.5 hours north of New Hampshire, there's no way the same group of people can handle that. So I've always done third-party management or tertiary management, right? Fortunately, I have a partner who owns that company. So pretty much everything in Massachusetts and New Hampshire, I can kind of kick to him.
You got one partner that you got to collaborate with.
And he can absorb that. Rhode Island, it's somebody else. It's a separate property management company. So that between those two, that handles most of the management. I like to say that the reason I cast such a wide net is because the model that we use, at least now, is, again, it's more transactional versus buy and hold for the long term. So if I can get a discount on a property an hour and a half away, I can sell it and I'm fine. Like I don't really need to have a huge infrastructure out there. Most of the time, well, not most of the time, but like there are instances where we can just assign a contract to somebody out there and I never have to even close on the property and it's an hour and a half away. So, I mean, in terms of infrastructure, it's really not that challenging. I think the challenge comes when you actually hold on to a property and you're trying to stabilize it and you're 3 states apart. That's why most of them are New Hampshire, congregated up in the New Hampshire area. I sold all the multis in Rhode Island. So I actually don't have anything in Rhode Island right now. It's mostly Worcester, Gardner, Mass, Leominster, Fitchburg area, and then, Laconia and South in New Hampshire. So
gotcha. Yeah, and I think you're hitting on a key point, which is like, how are you creating the value? Like as a real estate investor, that should be what you're thinking about, right? It's like some real estate investors have in-house management, in-house construction, and they just renovate quickly on a perfect budget, and they do a great job. And if that's your model and that's what you're going to spend your time in terms of like spending, if that's going to be where you spend your time to create your special sauce, then you could probably buy a deal that's listed by a broker and pay the most, quote unquote, right? And because you're going to create all this value through the business plan. Well, if you're going to use third-party management, or you're just going to use a GC that you're going to pay market rate to, well, then you got to get good deals, right? That's where you got to create your edge. So, the nice middle ground, and we work with a couple partners like this in our business, right? We find a good deal, and we have the partner who's got great infrastructure, management-wise, construction-wise, and 1 + 1 = 3 in that scenario. Which it sounds like what you're doing.
That's exactly what we do.
Why did you sell everything in Rhode Island? Just out of curiosity.
Just because. So I moved there for a while, and I was really hyper local to it, and then it just so happened that the partner that I was using for management started acquiring more in New Hampshire, and so as these deals came across, I started acquiring them, and we'd kind of work together and just kind of build the infrastructure up there. I still flip property in Rhode Island all the time, but the holds are mostly in New Hampshire and northern Massachusetts. So
for sure.
But you just hit on it. I've always leaned towards my skill set is deal finding, right? So you have to pick something, obviously, and really dig into that. And like you said, it could be management, could be deal finding, could be being an agent and doing this on that, whatever it is. For me, I think the biggest lever you can pull is finding the deal, because that's where everybody struggles. It's not coming up with cash. It's not, finding a manager. They're all over the place. Finding the actual deal is the key to this entire business, in my opinion. If you can find a discounted deal, you are good. In every sense, you can wholesale it, you can flip it, you can buy and hold it, you can develop whatever it might be, whatever the exit strategy you want to plan on. If you have the deal, you're good. And so, I've just taken that and scaled it up. So
yeah, scaled it quite a bit, right? And we'll talk about that next. And I think I always describe like the three kind of pillars of real estate investing. It's like you have acquisitions, right? You got to find the deal, and you have financing, which could be raising capital from equity investors, or the debt side of it from banks, whoever's going to give you the debt, then you got to operate it, right? And it's like you can cultivate a great skill set in any of the three. You could be incredible at raising capital and raise capital from investors who want 8% returns versus 15, and then that allows you to do some more things deal wise. You can renovate on budget, as we talked about, but like before you get to the raising of the money or the securing of the debt or the operations, you got to
you need the vehicle. You need the actual vehicle.
You need the deal before you get on the road. So let's talk about that, right? Because I know you do a lot of direct mail. Like we talked about this in previous episodes, which we're going to link to in the show notes and all that. But I think let's just take a step back. Let's talk about like how you view direct to seller marketing and prospecting, like the general strategies that you lean on, and then maybe we'll tactically get into what you do within that.
Okay. So I think direct to seller takes a specific type of person, though. You're not going to be surfing the internet and just pop across this deal and you can be able to analyze it. Most of the time, these individuals who either call us or our direct outreach to them, they're in a situation where we're trying to solve the problem, and then we end up with a deal. It isn't just send a letter, get a phone call back, lock up the deal at a great price, and you're good to go. There's always hurdles. There's always something going on. And initially, when I first started with buying multis, it came from almost all direct mail. As we pivoted to more flipping and more transactional, it's direct mail. We have cold calling on. We have direct email. We have Google Ads. We have a ton of referral-based partners where it's a family member, a friend, a bunch of real estate agents, whoever it might be. We're just continuously putting it out there that, hey, we're looking for this, and that's how we one of our major lead sources at this point. But mail is still steady, and Google Ads and direct outreach has done great over the last couple of years. But again, it isn't just flip a switch on and they you get all these leads.
You just start doing deals.
And you need to work them for. Dude, we bought a deal in Gardner, Massachusetts, 27 units. It took me 3.5 years of follow up with the guy. Multiple lunch and dinner dates. Finally signed the contract, and the day we bought it, we had $400,000 or $500,000 in equity. And people, a lot of people hear that and they're like, "That's ridiculous," but like it's true. That it took 3.5 years, and that's $100,000 a year in income. That's that's really not seen right until the day you buy the property, and it's worth it. So we do that all across a couple states, and it works great. I highly suggest if you're looking for deals, the off market is the way to go. It's a lot of work, but it's definitely the way to go.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, and it's interesting, like everything you just described, like to someone who's doing none of it, they could be intimidated. Like you just mentioned 4 or 5 channels, et cetera. But as you just mentioned, like you started with direct mail when you were buying multifamily properties. Like at least what I tell people, and I want your take on this, is like just pick a channel or two with a manageable list and just get going in the right direction with little expectations, right? Because I think that's like the key, as you described, right? Like stuff doesn't happen overnight here. No. But let's say we got an investor who's listening. They've got 20, 30 units, right? They've just bought them over the years from agents and stuff like that. They want to pour a little gas on their fire. What would be like, step 1, 2, 3, 4, like get started, start at least having conversations with sellers. Like how would you guide that new person down the road of, hey, I'm going to go out there and start talking to sellers?
Sure. So I think a key here is that it's going to depend on the actual type of deal too. So we're talking about multifamily, right? That's going to vary different than trying to flip houses.
For sure.
But as a high level, I think the best thing to do is you can go on court websites in Massachusetts and New Hampshire, and you can pull motivated seller lists. And what I mean by that is you can go pull every eviction that's occurring in the state of New Hampshire and Massachusetts online, every probate that's been filed. I mean, literally almost everything you can imagine. Notice to vacates and pretty much all of them. Download those, and half the time, depending on the list and your source, you can get the seller's information, or you can skip trace it, and then just call, email, and send letters to those, and just continuously doing it. That is literally it. You're going to get phone calls back, and you already know that something is going on in their life where if they're replying to you, it's almost an inbound lead at that point, which is way better than having an outbound lead.
Oh yeah.
And then just work it, figure out what their issue is. Why are they going through an eviction? How, can you come in there and take over the eviction for them? And in return, you get a $100,000 discount. I don't know, right? There's a bunch of different ways to do this, but every deal we do has some sort of, there's never a straightforward, oh yeah, I just need to sell it and I'm willing to sell it for a discount. It's always, I've had a tenant here for 5 years, he's not paying. I just inherited a home, I'm out of state. I just got divorced. A big one we just bought in Tilton last year. I actually ended up wholesaling the deal because it just made more sense. But 2.5 years of follow-up, got divorced. The wife forced them to get like 4 appraisals on the property. I just kept poking and poking and poking. They ended up selling to me like a couple $100,000 below the appraised value.
Just because he's like, I gotta be done with this.
100%. And the wife finally agreed. I was able to buddy up with both of them. So that's the type of conversations you have to be having. But that's a stepwise plan right there. Go on the court website, get the list. It's free. You don't have to pay for it. Or you can always prop stream or Reonomy or whatever it is. Download the list, blast them with mail, email, and phone calls. And you're gonna get leads.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, what's funny is like that specifically is you're going to be pulling a list that is far more developing it really is what you're going to be doing in this situation versus pulling. You're going to be creating a list when you do this. But like that's going to be a way better list than the guy who pulled the 5 to 25 units, this county, 100%. No sale last 5 years, because you have that triggering underlying 100%. Motivation, which is what we're looking for when we market to the broader list anyways. I wonder... I'm not going to imagine like AI can help with that now. Like we've used it for some cases, but like scraping these different sites with some different AI tools. Have you done any of that? Just that's a sidetrack, but out of my own curiosity.
Yeah. So I have 2 VAs who've been doing the lists for me for years. Like last 5 or 6 years, and I'm trying to push them to look into the AI along with me. And so we're trying to use it more for the outreach portion of it. Because I find that some of the court websites aren't always super accurate, and so having another set of eyes on it, helps out. But at some point, I think it's all going to be AI based, to be honest with you.
I would imagine. Yeah, specifically like the data, basically compiling the data would be the right way to put it, of like who you should be reaching out to. But let's talk about follow-up a little bit, because as you described, like that's really the separator 100%. Here. We did a 72-unit deal. Well, now it's over a year ago, but like that was a mailer that I sent when I was going to college at UNH. I think it was 2017. I sent this guy a letter because he had this big property down the street, and it was at the time I was like, I thought I was going to be like a real estate broker. So it was like, hey, I'll, sell your property, whatever. And then I started sending him mail just myself, and he kept all of them for like 6 years. And was like, you went from being an agent to, are you buying it now? He was like confused because I'm sending with different letterheads and different stories. But like we ended up buying that deal, and it was really just, it was 3 years worth of mail, and then it was like 2 years worth of follow-up. That 6th year is when we finally like negotiated a contract. But that's like, that's kind of par for the course in a lot of the deals that we do is you limp along, maybe you get a deal on that 2nd, 3rd, 4th mailing or round of outreach and you feel pretty good, but like it's a few years in when you start to get that hockey stick in terms of the response. So how do you kind of stay in the saddle, so to speak, for those first few? Like, is there, I guess tools you're using, general thoughts you have around follow up and how you do a good job at that and how you build those relationships. Like, how do you think about that?
So it depends on who we're talking to, right? But if you're just starting, it's really not that challenging. I mean, you're not going to have 1,000 leads in your CRM day one, right? You're going to get 1 and then 2, and then maybe after a month you've got 10 or 20, right? So it's not that hard to keep track of them, but a CRM is a must. So every time you get a lead, it should be inputted in there, and then you can automate everything now. So have their phone number, have their email inputted. You can set up an automation for a simple text. Hey, we spoke, blah, 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 just checking in. Hope everything's going well with you and your family. Just something very simple like that. Once a month, every 2 months, you'll kind of get a feel for it. For us in our business, we use Go High Level, so for a CRM. And it's column based, right? So we have a lead comes in, it goes to new lead. 30 days later, it goes to working. So now once it hits the working, we have an automated follow-up system for that. Now it'll keep going through until they say, no, we do not want to sell. And then it gets bumped over to the end as a dead lead. But even the dead lead, 6 months later, they're going to get a ping. People probably don't really like us for continuously following up, but I don't ever really get hate messages about stop texting me. It's more so, just, hey, I'm not interested. Take me off your list. And that's it. And we'll do that, right? So that's key. Have a CRM and make sure you can do it yourself or have somebody build out the automation portion for you. Some of the leads, I'll personally call still because I know it's a warm lead. I know it's a hot lead. I really love the property. And so every week I'll be picking up the phone and calling them myself. But that's few and far between. But when you're first starting, that's a must.
For sure. And I think what's interesting too is like, it's easy to overcomplicate this process if you're new, right? I think there's a tendency when you're newer and you're going to start doing something new in your business, or you're just going to, take a step back. You're going to get into real estate. You want to like solve for all of like the technology and software. Like when in reality, it's like if you have a list of call it 250, 300, 400, 500, probably even at the top end of that range of these different, ongoing housing code violations or evictions or whatever, and you've pulled this and it's a good list, and you send a mailer to all of them and then you email them all, you're maybe having like 10 conversations for like 250 or something like that. And like that's easy enough to like, you can use like a HubSpot, like a free CRM or even if you, I'm not recommending you do this, but like you could theoretically just have all of these people in like a Google Sheets on your list, right? And you're just tracking, so long as you have some automated fashion or automated, system to keep going back and following up with folks. But like, they could just be saved in your cell phone. You could be sending them. You don't need a solution for all of that stuff. You can just be emailing them from your personal email. And that's going to get you to the point to where, okay, maybe then, you've got 1,000 names on your 1,000 records and you're balancing 15, 20 leads. Okay, maybe now you level up to the next solution. But in reality, the advantage you have early, and I would imagine you'd agree, is like because you don't have a lot to focus on, like from a lead standpoint, and you can do so from your cell phone, from your personal email, and you've got like a real high touch on them, like you're gonna work those better anyways.
Your relationship building skills are way better than the monster who's trying to do it.
Exactly.
Or the conglomerate in the space. You're going to win the personal relationship game. And most of the deals that we buy are personal relationship based still. I can't tell you how many times I've had people crying on my shoulder while we're in their living room because we're solving a humongous problem in their life, or we're able to pay cash for a home that they otherwise would have to do a bunch of work to. And there's so many endless stories. And every time we're there, it's, well, we reached out to a couple other people, but we just we liked you guys, or we really liked your approach. You really tried to build a relationship versus talking about all numbers, and that's everything in this business, man. Like it really is everything.
Even like in multifamily compared to like single family, right? Because like I think there's a stigma that like when you're pursuing single family homes, it is a much more emotional sale. There's oftentimes like but like I think there's still a lot of truth to that in multifamily, where
absolutely
for even in our business, like we'll be looking at a 8, 10, 12 unit deal. It's not going to be the biggest deal in the world, but it's still a
but it's a similar type of
$1.5 million deal, right? It's the guy who's had it for 15 years who's like really concerned about the tenants who are living there, finding out he's going to sell and what's going to happen with Joe in unit 1. And like you have to take like a very the second you start talking about like cap rates and rent growth, and it's just like which I think is a hard mental shift for a lot of the multifamily guys to make, because they're used to speaking with the brokers, and you have to talk shit to you have to like really talk the lingo and all that with the broker, but like the second you start talking to the seller, you've got to completely code switch.
100%.
Which is a different ballgame, I think, for a lot of folks.
Yeah. Yep.
Let's talk about like direct mail best practices, because obviously you still do mail, and you found a bunch of deals through mail.
Yep.
Assuming that the recipient is the guy who owns that small to mid-sized multifamily property, like, you don't have to share the whole thing that you got in your mail piece, but like what are some of the stuff you want on a piece of mail that's going to help it convert?
All right, so I've been doing this pretty much the same way for the last 5 or 6 years with little tweaks. A lot of guys will send postcards or these long professional letters. I don't agree with any of that, and everything works, right? Really, everything works as long as you're consistent with it. But we've found the best is, how can I make this letter as personable as possible on a white letter with like handwritten on the outside? Nothing is really typed. A return label that's written. Instead of this, typewriter, everything is so professional with, the logo and all that. I don't really believe that for small multifamily, that's the way to do it, because you're dealing with somebody, similar to probably my parents or maybe my grandparents or someone who's, again, gone through an eviction or something like that. They want to see, wow, this guy's reaching out, knows the area super well. That's key, number one. Seems like he's a local investor who is able to make things easy for me, but at the same time, like, doesn't feel like a big company that's coming at me. So if you can find a way to word your letter where you make it seem like you're the small guy or maybe the smaller fish in the sea versus a huge company, and you personally can you can use open letter marketing, and there's a couple other agencies who can do this for you, or you can do it yourself when you're first starting out. I know we talked about this on the podcast. I bought a printer and ink, and I wrote everything out for like a year and a half.
We're the same, yeah. I bought a $1,000 printer from unnecessary. I didn't need to do that.
But dude, it worked.
But it worked.
Right? Did it not work? And it worked for me too. So you can still do the same thing today. People still go to their mailbox. But yeah, that's really the key. And addressing the first name of the person instead of just like property owner. And just that's high level. Those are the keys. I mean, you can mess around with the letter all you want, but ours is very simple. It's hi, Mr. So-and-so, or hi, David, whatever his name is. we're a local investor in the area. I own a handful of properties. I'm looking to purchase more this year. If you're open to having a conversation with us, I'd love to meet for coffee or something along those lines. And then just, best Ryan. And that's it,
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be harder than that. I think, it's another thing that I get a lot is like what's exactly on your mail? And I'm like, one, it's not like there's some big secret as to what's on there. Yep. But like at the end of the day, like the big through line, and this is what you're describing, is like, I mean, even if I take it to a step higher, like the one thing that we're trying to accomplish with the mail piece is convince this potential seller that we're not going to waste their time. And that if they reach out to us, like, we're local, we know the market, we're capable of buying the property, like we have the ability to actually financially buy the property. And three, that we're not going to bug them for too much info and bug the tenants. It's like, if you can check those 3 boxes and then you put yourself on the other the other side of the table, which, I mean, both of us have been, I'm sure, we've probably received a lot of letters from other guys. And it's like, the second I feel like I got to call you and educate you on what the market is, or two, that you're going to ask me for like my utility bills from 12 months ago, like I'm kind of like turned off to the whole thing. Like, the ideal experience is like, I'm telling you the address, maybe I'm giving you some info on the rents and the rent roll, and like, we did the roof 2 years ago, and like, I want you to kind of take that and like give me some general feedback. So for us, it's like, that's what we're trying to solve for. Like, we can get you an offer pretty quickly and easily, because we're local, because we have the ability to close, and because we own other buildings. And
exactly.
And also we're not going to, then there's all the other little stuff that comes after that, like no broker fees and stuff like that. But that's secondary, kind of the big overarching stuff, I would say.
I 100% agree. I think we're doing very similar, and I'm sure you've been doing similar for a very long time now, and it still works. So
yes. And I think it's going to continue to work too. I think over the last couple of years, like, the market's slowed down, I think, in terms of people like aggressively pursuing new deals, and I think we've been a little insulated into, generally speaking, the New England area, to like operational issues. Like, like we have a building in Florida, and I know a lot of guys who do deals in Florida and Texas and Arizona, and they're all like, we're not buying anything because we got to like fix the crap that we just bought because it's not going that well. So, but I think there's still somewhat of a similar dynamic in New England, even if it's not as crazy. So it's like, it's a good time to be doing this type of marketing, because I don't think you're competing with as many buyers. Like, I think the market's kind of softened up a little bit in terms of like the number of individual buyers. Would you agree with that? That's just my anecdotal feel, but
I agree. And I think you just hit on it. There's less competition doing it this way, because what happens is with off market is someone will hear this podcast and then they'll go try it for like 2 months or something.
Exactly.
I just spent like $2,500. I can't do this anymore. Okay, well, now he's gone, and then somebody else will try it, and it's just on repeat. Meanwhile, Our team is still doing it every single day for the last 4 or 5 years, and we just keep pumping it out and pumping it out and pumping it out. Direct mail specifically is all timing. I mean, it could be 1 letter or 400 letters to that person. At some point, that person is going to want to sell, and if you're at top of mind when that happens, you get the opportunity before somebody else. So if you do it once or twice or 3 times and expect a letter, or even 7 times and expect a deal, maybe it'll happen. I mean, I hope it happens. It should happen.
It has happened to people.
100%.
But it's not a long-term sustainable strategy in any real way. You know, and it's like what you just described is like you just want to be top of mind for when that triggering event happens. Like I think there's a misconception with people who get into this meaning start marketing to sellers, that they are going, you know, there's some negotiating tactic, or they're going to be, you know, they're going to try to convince a seller to sell. Like you're never going to convince a seller to sell. Maybe there's the edge case. You know,
not
where
often though.
The only edge case I can think of in my head is where the seller thinks that the property is worth way less than what it is, and then you convince them to sell with this big number. You know, but like you're never going to convince them if they understand kind of roughly the market to like be a seller. Like the whole game is you just want to be around the corner when it is time for them to sell. Like when their partner wants to sell and they kind of don't, but their partner does, and they're like, whatever, we'll sell it.
Or where they just get older. Easy solution for them. Exactly.
When their kid tells them like, hey, I actually don't want that, so please sell it because I don't want to. I don't want to inherit that 5 unit in Manchester because I live down in Southern Mass. So it's like all that stuff is kind of what you just have to be around for when any of those things happen, and then you want to be easy to work with.
Which is why you can do the general list from PropStream and whatever, and we still do that. That's fine. But that's why when you hit the probate or the evictions or, you know, the pre-foreclosure, whatever, you know, list you decide to focus on, it doesn't take as many touches with those versus just an absentee owner, because that absentee owner is getting hundreds of letters because they're on a massive list. This eviction person might be getting 1 or 2. People don't even know how to find it. So like you're already, you know, you're going to be top of mind if they're actually, you know, looking to sell. And you're hitting them at a motivating factor or a motivating time in their life to sell versus, you know, if that person lived out of state, they've owned this property for a long time, all of a sudden now they're going through an eviction. Well, I hate going through evictions, right? I don't want to deal with them. If I'm like sick of the property and I get a letter, I'm going to call that person back just because, right?
Bad taste in your mouth.
Exactly.
100%.
I've just bought one in Duxbury, closed on Tuesday in Duxbury, and first email to the lady, calls me back. Yes, I want to sell. Yes, I want to sell your company. I did some research. I want $500,000. We walked out to the property. $500,000. It's not an amazing deal, but it's not, you know, we're not going to lose. We're not going to lose. So instead of beating her up, we sign the contract right there. We close on Tuesday. We'll go in, we'll do some TLC, and we'll sell it, and we'll do fine on it, right? But we're taking over the tenant. We already worked a deal out with the tenant. We paid him $10,000. He's walking out the door the next day. She's like, oh man, I should have just done that. I'm like, but like this is why we're here, right? And so, and that's one off, of course, but it happens.
But it's an example. You know, you change that story by 1-2%. You know, this little detail, that little detail, but like the same general story is played out for both of us over dozens and dozens of deals. This is again kind of mainly for me and maybe the other New England folks listening, which there's a good chunk of them. But like differences in marketing and seller motivation, general like success you have or experience you have marketing direct to sellers in Mass versus like New Hampshire? And the answer could be like there's not that big of a difference, but I'm curious as to like how the two markets differ in, you know, because you're doing good volume in both. Like what's the difference there?
Yeah, I mean, Massachusetts, I think if you look at like 495 and then everything east, most of the sellers in there, unless again they're going through a motivating factor, are a little bit more sophisticated, right? Like someone from Cambridge calls me.
Yeah, this is the greater Boston area for the folks that aren't correct. 30 minutes to Boston,
Correct. And Cambridge specifically is one of the most expensive towns in the country, right? So if somebody inherits a home there or it's a 5-unit property, it's going to be harder for me to get that person to agree to a larger discount on a property off market than it is in Gardner, Massachusetts, where property isn't worth nearly as much, right? And they're not taken care of as well. And, you know, maybe that, but, you know, and I don't mean this in any way, you know, to be prejudiced at all, but maybe the person in Gardner doesn't really think their property is worth as much as somebody in Cambridge does, right? Or maybe they don't live there and they don't want to deal with a property out in Gardner, Massachusetts because it's a C class, you know, maybe B- neighborhood versus A+. And I find that West, you know, Central Mass and a little bit Western and New Hampshire act very similar. Once you get closer to the city in Boston,
different ballgame.
Totally different ballgame. Completely different ballgame, because most of the time, if you're buying a rundown 4-unit or 8-unit or something near the city, you're competing with a developer who's going to knock that down and put 16 condos. You're competing with a realtor who wants to list it $1 million over what you can pay it for. I'm sorry, what you can pay for it. And so, sellers have a harder time wrapping their head around a huge discount. I'm not saying it's impossible. We do it. We do it.
Yeah, it's just it's less frequent.
Specifically for multifamily, I think your Central Mass, Worcester, Leominster, Fitchburg, Gardner, Pepperell, that area have had a lot of success with mail, and New Hampshire, a ton of success with mail.
Mm-hmm. I think it's getting a little tougher.
Yes, I do.
Very broadly speaking, specifically New Hampshire, because that's the only place we market. I remember back in the good old days, which for me is like 2016 to 2021, like that 5-year stretch of like right when I got into real estate personally.
Yep.
And then, the interest rate, or I should say the, zero interest rate craze of 2021 and whatever, like where just everybody was spazzing out trying to buy real estate. But up to that point from 2016, it was like, we were sending mail and emails and we were just talking to literally everybody.
Yep.
Like, and I wish, everybody says in hindsight you do things differently, but like one of those things where it's like when it feels like it's that easy to get a deal where like in the moment, it's not like,
you don't know it in the moment.
Yeah. Like in the moment too, it's like in the moment they felt like good deals where it was like, oh, we're buying this at 60 a door, but like the comps are at 85, 90 a door. Like that's a good deal. Like it wasn't like, based on today's prices, they were good deals. They were good deals at the time. Yep. But not many people were doing that, the direct-to-seller thing, right? Yep. I think it's become a little bit more widely understood that this is a strategy you can take. Yep. But I think that what the continued differentiator has been people's lack of ability to stay consistent and to do the follow-up, which I think is like, if you're going to be like, I'm going to do this and I want to actually see results, like that's where, if you can do good at that, that's really going to help you. Because as you described, like, a lot of people talking about on podcasts, a lot of people send the one round or make the 25 cold calls. They get a little discouraged and they, stop doing it. Yep. But it still works. It's one of those things a little harder, but it still works. Yep. All right. So you're obviously flips, multifamilies, multiple states, like 60, 80 deals a year. That's a ton of deals. Yep. What's like what's the biggest challenge that you have in your business right now, would you say? Like, what's the one thing you're kind of like actively trying to solve?
Honestly, I feel like it's still deals, because that's the only thing that keeps you.
Everyone's listening going, I have no hope then. He's finding 70
but you don't need to do that many deals a year, right? Exactly. You can do 1 or 2 and supplement at your job and do extremely well. Mm-hmm. I mean, but at the end of the day, the only way to do more is to have more deals, because I can't, I can't bring on more people. I can't do more flips. I can't hire more construction guys. I can't do more, raise more money unless there are more deals at the table. But I will say, I don't want to say content or satisfied, but I'm not unhappy about where we're at right now. So I sort of feel like where we're at is pushing my limits a little bit, which is great. But it's not so much where I'm stressed out every single day like I used to be, right? I feel like we're, in a good spot. So, but deals, I mean.
Yeah, I mean, everybody always wants more deals. It's the gas that feeds the engine, right? Yep. I mean, at the end of the day. I'm gonna kind of twist it a little bit then, like, and this is going to be kind of retroactive, like organizationally, right? There's a lot of things that need to be, like there's a lot of systems and processes you have to build to do that amount of deals, to manage that many construction projects, all this stuff. Like, as you went from, call it the 2020 days, 2019 to 21, you're buying some multifamilies, you're pulling them out. It's a much simpler business back then, I would imagine, to now where you're doing a high volume, a lot of transaction coordination. Like,
way more active.
What were some of the pain points that you felt as you grew the quote unquote business? Not just the finding of the deals, but building the organizational infrastructure.
Okay. Yep. So we've always been good at finding deals. So let's put that aside. So I've always had leads coming in. We've always been able to lock up contracts and get deals done. The next thing that happens is a mix. You need more capital and you need people to actually execute the deals. And they have to go hand in hand, because if I buy a property and raise money and I can't execute the deal, whoever, we're in trouble, right? So those went hand in hand. So when we didn't have enough capital, we raised capital. At this point, we raise capital for doing buy and holds, but we don't really raise capital if we're flipping homes, because it's too expensive for the capital. I'd rather just, deploy.
Just do it in-house,
Yep. So, but at the same time, we need a good general contractor, a good property manager. So between the 2, maybe 3 of those sectors, that's the next step after you're able to get a handful of deals under your belt. I've had contractors walk away from projects on me in the middle of them. I've been robbed of $35,000 before from a contractor. You name it, it's happened with contractors. And so I think raising money is not that difficult, but it is probably the next step. But the contractor is the most difficult part. Finding people to actually do flip the units, flip the house, get on the roof, put siding on, and timely and affordably, and the way you like it, who can communicate.
Show up 5 days a week.
Oh my God, it's endless, and it's still a challenge today. I mean, fortunately, I have a really good. I would say I have one crew that's excellent that I try to max out all the time, and I have another crew who we use very often, but my primary one is the go-to, and he can handle 3, 4, 5 a month, and the other one can handle 2 or 3 a month. And so between that, it adds up.
Kind of keeps you busy.
Yep.
Yeah, it keeps your projects full rather. Yep. But yeah, I mean, this is like the good news. If you're somebody out there who like you are a GC or your cousin's a GC or you have a good relationship with one, like I would say that's always our issue, right? It's like everyone forgets about construction as part of the value add process, right? It's always easy to forget, like, you find the deal, you got to, seller financing, raise the money, a lot of bank debt, private money. Like everyone's focused so much on the deal and the dollars. Like kind of the hardest function to solve for consistently right now is like labor, materials, getting stuff done on time, et cetera. And like spitting out a nice, pretty apartment or house on the back end if you're flipping it. And like that is a competitive advantage if you do have a good relationship or you have those skills yourself or whatever, right? So I'm always curious as to like guys who are running at your level, like what the pain points are, what they have been as you grew it, but that certainly makes sense. Last question, then we're going to move to our other segment here. Where do you see, and I usually ask like, what's your take on the market here over the next 6 to 12 months? Feel free to talk about it, whether it's multifamily or single family, or like where you see, because you're spending so much time marketing direct to sellers, like how do you maybe see that part of the business changing, getting more challenging, easier, whatever? So I kind of just free form your thoughts on
good question.
End of 26, throughout the rest of 26 as we record this in early April.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, so for multifamily, specifically, 5 units or more, it's really heavily dependent on the interest rate and, the cap rate and so I don't have as much control really over that.
Yeah.
Nor do I have control in the single family space, but here in Massachusetts, at least, single family homes, like value hasn't dropped all that much because there still isn't that much inventory. So I mean, we still buy a bunch. They're still selling. I mean, the last 3 have gone over ask, not a ton, but over ask, which is great, right? I mean, so I think I try to stay like negative inside, meaning like I always think, oh my god, like the market's going to go down. We have to buy at this level because of that, and I think that protects me. But at the same time, data shows, in all of our flips and stuff that things are still moving and it's still selling fine. And so I think 26 will be okay. I mean, I don't want to predict and say it's going to go down or up. I think it's probably going to be stable. Yeah. We had interest rates come down in the mid 5s or something. Now they're back up to 6 something because of the war and the oil prices and everything, right? But multifamily, and this is going to change at some point, and I hope it changes soon, but I don't know that I'm going to go on a big buying spree of multifamily again like I did in 18, 19, 20, 21, unless I see something where specifically interest rates are going to come down and I can execute the strategy we were doing again. Or it's such a good deal where I have 6.5 debt on it and I'm completely fine and it does extremely well. If it isn't one of those two, I'm probably not going to buy and hold it. Otherwise, it's going to be stay transactional. So
100%. Yeah, and I tend to have the same opinion, right? It's like the structural misalignment in the market from 2018 to 2022 where you could buy deals that like, and stabilize into 9, 10 cap rates, like in Manchester, for example, where it's like, by the time you have your total cost basis, all your costs into the deal, purchase price, renovations, closing costs, your NOI, and you're looking at like 10% yield on cost, and your debt's at 3.5, like now the spread is like you get to 8, 9, you're pumped, and then your debt's at like 6.25, like much tighter spread, right?
Yeah, dude.
So it's like if there's a tanking in interest rates and they are cut significantly, like lock in good debt into projects where you have that massive spread, and then you have a real margin. But it hasn't been like that in a little bit.
I mean, this is probably going to get some people upset, but I genuinely don't think that your move right now should be to go find a 6 unit or 10 unit and pay a price and put 7% debt on it and try to do a burr strategy. Unless the numbers are so good, but it's so difficult to find that. Dude, we bought a house in Leominster, a property in Leominster, a 6 unit, for less than $100 grand a door. Most of them are selling for $150 a door.
Yep.
I am not making money on the property. Like, it's breaking even. And most people are okay with that. I am not okay with that. Like, why would you want to buy? Why would you want to sink $100 grand or raise money to not be able to pay the guy to, pay your investor, not be able to make money on it? Like, it just doesn't make sense. I don't understand how people can pay $150 a unit, in specifically that town, let's say it, and cash flow. I don't see how it's possible. So I think people might get upset, but I think the move here is market to direct to seller, find a good deal, and then either wholesale it to somebody else, get a chunk of cash, and then keep doing it, or flip the property, get a chunk of cash, and then deploy it into a multifamily.
And if it doesn't,
exactly. Yeah. My mind really opened up and changed when I became transactional because, number one, we made a ton more money, like way more money. If I make 10% on a rental, or I can make 50 grand up front on a flip. It's going to take me 7, 8, 9, 10 years to make 50 grand versus making 50 now. I'm taking the 50 and I'm going to do it again and just keep repeat. And before you know it, you have this cash stack that now if you find a deal you really like, use your own money, deploy it into the deal. You don't have a risk on it anymore. It makes some money, and you can just keep doing it. And that's kind of the the trajectory we've taken. It's worked out great. So
love it, man.
Yeah.
This is great. Where can folks reach out to you, learn more about what you got going on?
Yeah, social media is probably the easiest way. DM Facebook or Instagram, Specialized Property Group, and you'll find us.
Awesome. Appreciate it, man. This has been great.
This has been awesome. Thank you.